can we start? May I ask to close the door? Okay, so good afternoon once again. Welcome at our 2018 HDIM site event called Tajikistan 2008, No Freedom Beyond This Point. On behalf of organizers, Global Advocates Foundation, represented by me, University of Exeter's Central Asian Political Exiles Project, represented by Sapira Furstenberg and John Heddershaw, Freedom Now, represented by Maran Turner, Human Rights Watch, represented by Steve Swerdlow, and Fair Trials International, represented by Bruno Min. Let me welcome all of you and thank you very much for your presence here, both at the conference, within the room, but also in front of your computers, because today's site event is live streamed on the Facebook profile of Global Advocates Foundation. So also for your social media presence, let me remind you that hashtags for today are HDIM 2018 and Tajikistan 2018. Our site event will last for 1 hour, and after interventions of our speakers, we will have a short question and answers session. However, if it will be needed, I strongly encourage you to continue our discussion outside the plenary hall. At 2:30 we have to finish because the next plenary session will start here. Also, from the other organizational issues, after the site event, we'll have a statement submitted to the ODIHR documents system on the current human rights situation in Tajikistan. And this statement will be addressed to Mr. Ambassador Idibek Kalandar, head of the Tajik delegation to the OSCE. So maybe starting from the first speaker, our first speaker will be Maran Turner. Maran is the founding executive director at Freedom Now. This is a US-based NGO that works on elimination of politically motivated detention worldwide. They also represent numerous prisoners of conscience. Before joining Freedom Now, Maran worked as a human rights lawyer and was honored a pro bono lawyer of the year for her work on human rights violation in Myanmar. And we start from the presentation of Maran because we would like to start with some concrete cases, some concrete names. We believe it is always better to discuss difficult topics, mentioning concrete names and asking for change in this concrete cases. So Maran, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you to everyone who is here today. It's nice to see so many people in the room interested in the human rights situation in Tajikistan. As a quick background, as mentioned by Tomas, my organization works on addressing arbitrary detention and deficiencies in rule of law, and particularly politically motivated harassment of activists and dissidents, and particularly those that are wrongfully arrested and imprisoned. We work on their behalf, providing legal assistance and representation aimed at helping to secure their release, as well as broader advocacy support for the issues and the situations that they face. My organization has worked throughout the OSCE region for a number of years, and I can say on Tajikistan, we've worked since 2016. So it was around 2015 when we all started hearing lots and lots of reports about how essentially respect for human rights was in free fall in Tajikistan. And that President Rahmon was making all the same moves that many of the other regional leaders have, which is taking control of the media and using law enforcement and the courts to eliminate opponents and to silence dissidents. And so it was around that time that we immediately started looking into Tajikistan, and we've worked on quite a few cases. And right now I think we have about 5 active cases that we were working on or that have already been filed at the UN. So just quickly to give a primer before I get into the cases, I'm going to try to speak as fast as possible because I do realize that we're short on time, and I hope that there'll be some time for questions. But just quickly to put it into perspective, Freedom House, the Freedom Index this year ranked Tajikistan an 11 out of 100 They dropped 6 places since the ranking in 2016. And just to put this in perspective, Turkmenistan, which is considered the least free in the region, is ranked 4 out of 100, and Kyrgyzstan, which is considered the most free, partly free, is ranked 37. So Tajikistan is among the lowest. We're seeing a switch from Uzbekistan, which is starting to rise in the ranks, and certainly with talk of reform, I can understand that, and Tajikistan is rapidly declining. The Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy Index has rated Tajikistan 159 out of 167. They're tied with Saudi Arabia. The issue that I mainly want to focus on is the government's misuse or abuse of its judicial system and essentially using arrest and prosecution as a political tool. Again, this is very common in the region. It's not a surprise. President Ramon and his administration, they exert a lot of influence over the judiciary, and they use it for their own means and their vendettas. President Ramon appoints and dismisses judges and prosecutors. Judicial proceedings in the country are reportedly riddled with corruption. Bribery is widespread. Judges are not well paid, and as I understand it, being a judge in Tajikistan is not really particularly considered prestigious. And so the judiciary just doesn't have the resources it needs to actually function independently, and so it's no wonder that the executive, that the president is able to essentially use it for his own agenda. It would require significant overhaul to address the level of instability and weakness in it. One of the big concerns in the last couple of years is not just the fact that the government controls who's a prosecutor, who's a judge, and as I said, is using the system. They've also sought to eliminate access to defense lawyers, which of course is very, very important for a judicial system. In 2015, they passed a law which required lawyers to renew their legal licenses, and they needed to now do this with the Justice Ministry as opposed to an independent bar association, which is generally the norm. They also were requiring everybody to retake the bar exam and to do this every five years. After this law was implemented, the number of lawyers in the country fell by more than 50%. Amnesty reported that there is 1 lawyer per 14,500 people in Tajikistan. Tajikistan is party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which provides right against arbitrary detention, right against torture, freedom of expression, association, etc. However, and it actually has domestic laws that basically mirror a number of those protections. However, they've got a number of laws that they use to go after opponents. National security laws are one of the chief means that they use, and I know Mr. Kabiri will speak about the experience of the IRPT being targeted under those laws. One of the attributes of those laws that clearly the government likes, not least of which the stigma of trying to brand someone a terrorist, but also they hold these trials in secret. And while holding them in secret, quite often there are military judges that oversee the trial. Also in November 2016, President Rahmon signed a law that made insulting him punishable by up to 5 years in prison, and so this is another law that is being used against people. The UN has issued a number of condemnations in cases. The Human Rights Committee since 2003 has actually issued 20 decisions, finding a total of 64 violations of the ICCPR, particularly with respect to arbitrary detention and violations of fair trial. 2 cases have been decided by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and I can tell you a number of others are pending that we have filed or that will soon be filed. The special rapporteurs, there have been 18 communications from UN rapporteurs, many of which have come from the Rapporteur on Independence of Judges and Lawyers. And so with that, I know I'm not actually using my my PowerPoint, so let me just get to some cases and speak about the people. I'm going to speak about 3 individuals. We actually also work on IRPT cases. I'm going to leave discussion of their cases to Mr. Kabiri, so I want to focus on a few others. The first is Zaid Saidov. He's a well-known businessman and a former government official from Tajikistan. He was arrested in May 2013 and he's now serving 29 years on charges that were widely believed and that we determined were intended really to just disrupt his political activities. In early 2013, he convened a committee to discuss creating a new political party. And then he created that political party called the New Tajikistan Party, which he created in April 2013. Shortly after the announcement, he received threats to his life. And while away on a business trip in May 2013, his house was raided, and when he returned from that trip, he was arrested the moment he stepped off of the plane. He was charged with polygamy, illegal deprivation of an individual's freedom, rape, fraud, and bribery. He was not permitted free access from his lawyer. In fact, only one meeting was allowed for him to have a private meeting with his lawyer. Right after he was arrested, the government immediately went on a huge propaganda campaign against him, slandering him all over the media, and in fact, handing out flyers on the street. So it was very clear the political motivations in this trial. His trial was closed despite Tajik law calling for open trials, and in fact, this was not even they weren't even using the pretext of a military tribunal. He was convicted on all charges, received a 26-year sentence. When he appealed, the appeal went to the exact same court, the same judge. And then in October 2014, they brought new charges: forgery, embezzlement, abuse of office, tax evasion. These are probably charges that many of you in this room have heard. They're very, very common throughout the region. Azerbaijan uses them, I can tell you, with relish. And 3 additional years were added to his sentence. So this man is sitting in prison with a 29-year sentence because he created a political party and was clearly seen as a rival to Rahmon's power, and he's serving a life sentence. The next case I want to speak about is Mr. Yurov, who is a human rights lawyer. He was arrested in 2015 and sentenced to 28 years in prison. He founded an independent law firm called CPAR in 2007, and he was involved in a number of high-profile cases. For example, one time the former chief military prosecutor of Tajikistan and a current attorney general of Tajikistan actually tried to dissolve his law firm as he started to get into politically sensitive cases. And in early September 2015, Yurov, along with his brother, took on the initial representation of 13 members of the IRPT who were accused of orchestrating a failed coup in 2015. IRPT was designated a terrorist organization, and police, they arrested his lawyer, Mr. Yurov, raided his home, did so without a warrant, and then ultimately charged him with forgery, fraud, and, quote, arousing national, racial, local, or religious hostility and extremism. The charges appear to, in part, have been prompted by an interview Yurov gave on the day of his arrest, in which he announced that his client had been tortured. Some of his clients had been tortured in pretrial detention, and he called on a coalition of his legal colleagues to join him in representing IRPT. This is when his house was searched, and documents that would have been covered under attorney-client privilege were confiscated by the government. He was held in pretrial detention for about 8 months, where he was beaten and held in solitary confinement. Again, his trial was rife with procedural violations. He didn't have full access to his lawyer, and the conviction, they also convicted him on extremism, which was based solely on some materials that they found in the law firm office. And he was sentenced to 23 years. They then decided, after he read a poem in trial at his sentencing, to charge him with contempt of court and insulting a government official, and then he was sentenced to an additional 2 years. And he's been found guilty on all of these, and then eventually was given another 12-year sentence on additional charges based on insulting the president. So this is a combined sentence of 28 years. So this government, by comparison, if you look at sentences that we see in Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, they tend to run more around 10 years. Tajikistan is not even trying to even meet its own law. It's clearly trying to just put the people doesn't like a way for life. And then finally, I would also speak, there's a number of other lawyers that have also been harassed and arrested, quite a few of them. Just in the interest of time, I'll just move on to the last case I wanna share with you, which is this case. Kurlu Mirasadov, he's a well-known journalist and comedian. He wrote an open letter to the president in 2017, as well as the prosecutor general and a local government, asking them to investigate corruption. He was actually alleging that the head of a local youth and sport department had solicited bribes, and in fact having to do with his comedy troupe. And in December 2015, he was summoned to the local prosecutor, where he was arrested, charged with embezzlement, forging documents, and providing false testimony, and was sentenced to 12 years. His case was roundly condemned and widely condemned and received quite a lot of attention. And in fact, it's one of the first cases that we've really seen that in Tajikistan that really got the attention that it was due. And I just want to say thank you to everyone in the room that raised his case. Because he has, in August, he was released. So he's no longer in prison. However, he still has very restricted rights. Could be rearrested at any time, and he's certainly someone that we want to make sure that we don't forget and whose situation we're monitoring. But this is a case, and why I want to raise it is this is a case where international advocacy works, and there's no doubt in our minds that he's free because of all of the attention. And so with that, I want to just stop and hand it over to the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Maran. So our second speaker will be Mr. Muhyiddin Kabiri. Mr. Kabiri is a Tajik politician. He is the chairman of the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan. This is the main opposition party in the country. Just before the start of this HDIM meeting, he became also the chairman of the National Alliance of Tajikistan. This is an alliance of 4 Tajik opposition political groups. Mr. Kabiri is well known as a scholar, and he published more than 10 books and hundreds of articles on various topics regarding Islam, the radicalization in Central Asia, and of course Tajikistan. Mr. Kabiri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator Thomas in last minute told me that I should speak in English because unfortunately here is not translation from Russian, but my paper was written in Russian, so now I will try to translate myself from Russian to English, and I ask you to help me to understand yourselves because my English is not so perfect, but I will do all my best. I don't want to talk now about general situation because many of you knows what's going now in my country. I will focus mainly in the situation around my party, around political prisoners, and about what is the nature of how the governments like Tajik government manage to put a lot of people in the prison, and same times we have no international reaction, we have no news in Europe countries, in West countries. So it's a very unique situation when now we have another situation now. A lot of international organizations, they are speaking about Tajikistan, but unfortunately I think it was very late. But it's good that now we have at least some voice. I thank many of international organizations who already done a lot of my country for political prisoners, as now I showed this very good and useful presentation. As you know, IRPT was only political registered religion-based party in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and after a peace agreement in '97, which was signed in Moscow under the umbrella of United Nations Security Council, Our party was a member of government, and 3 times until 2015 our party was parliamentary party, and I was 2 times for 10 years member of parliament representing IRPT. And it is a very big question how parliamentary official party could in one night become a terroristic organization. How it's possible. But in my country, in our situation, unfortunately, sometimes it's happened, it's possible. In 2015, when after the parliamentary elections, our party, there was a result. Of course, we didn't recognize this result that our party has only 1.5% of voice. And it means that our party will not be parliamentary after that. So also Communist Party, and after that there was a lot of rumors that soon our party will be closed. I left Tajikistan in 2015, 16th of March, to Malaysia and later to Turkey. And when I was in Turkey, General Prosecutor of Tajikistan announced that there are cases against me for some economic questions 15 years before. It was for me very strange that after 15 years, and after that twice I was member of parliament for 10 years, and only after the elections they found that there was some mistakes from myself about some houses and all lands. And also Minister of Justice sent us later ultimatum that before 5 of September 2015 our party should be closed by ourselves. In another case, there will be taken different measures against the party. I want to ask you to focus on these dates, 5 of September. You know that 4 of September there was another incident in Tajikistan, so-called COP by Deputy Minister of Defense Nazarzoda. I think that there are some links between these 2 days, 4 of September and 5 of September. There was also, we planned to make our Congress, party Congress, on 20 of September. So why the government decided to close our party before this Congress? I don't want now to talk and to take you time about the details about my negotiations with government, why they shouldn't close our party. I try to explain them that it will help extremism, it will help terrorism, it will be in benefit of radical and extremist groups, not only in Tajikistan, but in region, whole region. But I was told that time that decision is already made, so we have no any chance to be a legal party. But I can be minister, I can have with me some party members to take some positions, but not as representative of party, not as representative of part of peace agreement, but as individuals. Of course, it was not acceptable by us. And it was very risky to come back to Tajikistan because there was a criminal case against me. So it was only the question of time, what day and how our party will be closed. So unfortunately, in one night, more than 200 our leadership was arrested, and in very quick decision, quick process, some of them now in jail for life. Two of my deputies, the majority of political council of party from 20 years to 30 years. And we have also a lot of local activists who are in jail. And international reaction was very weak. Even before this event, in July 2015, I sent letter to Mr. Putin and Mr. Rouhani as guarantors of peace agreement, that please, you countries should do something to intervene in this process, because it is against peace agreement, it is against our constitution. Unfortunately, that time all of these countries were busy with another international crisis points like Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, and nobody paid that time attention to this crisis. So now we have, unfortunately, the majority of our party members in prison, I mean leadership, and about more than 5,000 people migrated to Europe, to Turkey, to another CIS countries. So, but it was not only a whole story of tragedy of Tajik people, of our supporters. Even a lot of families, children, they were taken as hostages. Let me give you only one example from my family members. Now it's very good. I want to use this opportunity to thank all of the people, organizations who helped my grandchildren Hamza to leave Tajikistan, and now he is in Istanbul. He is receiving treatment in Istanbul clinics. But these 3-year-old children with cancer was not allowed to leave Tajikistan for treatment. Even Deputy Ministry of Health, she told that there are no any chance for these children to receive treatment outside. So we should only to wait the final days, and we can only to help him to feel less pain. But thankful for all international organizations, international campaign. I want to thank human rights organization and Tajik civil society who made this international campaign. Now the situation with Hamza is better, and Turkish doctors, they are doing all best to help him. They inform us there are chances 50-50. So we hope, we pray that everything will be okay. So, in conclusion, I want to say that campaign with Khairullah Mirsaidov, with Hamza, Fatima, which later came here to Europe, it shows us that it's possible to change things in Tajikistan if there will be strong international voice. Without international support, without international voice, it's not possible to do something in Tajikistan. Tajikistan, it's not Belarus. Tajikistan is not North Korea. Tajikistan needs to international support, technical support, financial support. So we are not calling for sanction against the country, but we are calling for sanction against the people who are involved in this kind of violation against human rights. So I think now it is the time to raise this voice. Again, I thank you, organizers, for this event. That I hope that it is the beginning of new era, new time to help Tajik people, especially people who are in prison now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabiri, for sharing with us the IRPT story and also your personal family stories. And now the next speaker will be Dr. Sapiria Furstenberg. Sapiria is a lecturer in politics at the Department of Social Science at Oxford Brookes University in the United Kingdom. She was previously a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Exeter, working on Central Asian political exiles database. Her research interests are mostly in post-Soviet regional Central Asia and extraterritorial politics. Sapiria, please.
Thomas, thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you also for putting up this important session, because this could not have been possible without one man, and this is Thomas, so thank you. Well, today I'm going to speak about Central Asian political exile database that we're working at Exeter, but before that I also want to state that I'm also speaking today on behalf of John Hedershaw, who is here with us today, who actually was the main initiator of this project, together with other researchers based at Columbia University, such as Edward Lemon and also David Lewis at Exeter, for example. And I don't want to take, therefore, credit for all this project for myself only. As Maran and Muhyiddin have already mentioned, repression in Tajikistan operates very much internally but also externally beyond states' traditional borders. And so the Central Asia Political Database Project documents cases of transnational repression and human rights abuses faced by individuals living in exile. So we are focusing on 5 countries of Central Asia. For the moment, we have 255 cases. The latest version of the database is now available online. We have updated it in 2018. But today, I'm just specifically going to focus on Tajikistan. Right. So who is a political exile? So a political exile, according to our research, is an individual who prolonged a specific amount of time abroad and who's been persecuted for political or wholly political nature. And so we are distinguishing here 4 groups. The first group of political exiles are the former regime insiders. The second group are members of opposition political parties. The third group are banned clerics or alleged religious extremism. The fourth group is independent journalists, academics, and civil society. And then recently, we actually also observed that we have a 5th and emerging pattern of group that we call the others, and these are individuals who've been politically persecuted because of the above 4 association with these individuals. So, for example, this can be lawyers who have defended the case of IRPT, for example, and who've been forced to flee into exile. Additionally, when we have actually documented these cases, we also noticed that all of these individuals here, they've been specifically subject to 3 stages of extraterritorial security. And within these 3 stages, they both operate informally and formally. So the first stage that we call is when individuals are put on notice. So the formal measures are the formal notification to foreign security services or issuing of Interpol red notices. The informal measures is related to the persecution of the family members, disinformations, and threats and violence against associates living in exile. The second stage is arrest on detention. So we observe the formal measure will be the prolonged detention without a fair trial, or loss of rights to remain status or loss of citizenship. So we observed many members of the IRPT or the Group 24 who had a double citizenship. So, for example, the Russian citizenship have been actually scrapped of their Russian citizenship, and that actually allowed very easy extradition back to Tajikistan. In terms of the informal measures, this is ongoing threats to family members, dispossession of business and property, abuse and torture while in custody, but also assault on person when they were released after their detention. And finally, stage 3 is extradition and endgame. This is the worst case scenario that can happen to a political exile. And here we have two formal measures. The first one is extradition, so it's a return to country, or the second one is deportation to a third country or deportation to Tajikistan. Informal measures are more scary actually, and they operate through detention, assassination, kidnappings, or even disappearance. And so now I'm going to focus specifically on Tajikistan to show actually how transnational repression operates. So the figure, the bar in red that you can see here, these are the members of the opposition groups who've been, as you can see, targeted extremely badly in all stages of transnational security. So just to go through the bar chart if you're not able to read, so in blue it's the former insiders, the red are the opposition, so this is Group 24 and IRPT. In green are the clerks and the religious groups. In orange are the media and civil society, and in yellow are the group that we call the fifth group of political exiles that we call the others. And as you can see, through every stages of extraterritorial security measures, the Tajik opposition groups have been particularly badly hit by the transnational repression of the regime. In total, we have documented in our database 55 cases, and among these 55 cases, 39 of them have been are part of the opposition and have been subject to these extraterritorial security practices. And so, if I'm going to look now particularly what happens to the Tajik citizens living abroad in each stage, what we have also recently noticed in stage 1, this is when individuals are put on notice, is that the government is actually becoming extremely, I would say, ingenious in using its security practices by, for example, using cybersecurity surveillance techniques, digital surveillance, where we have cases where several individuals and their accounts have been hacked, or when there were, some individuals have received unknown calls from individuals who have threatened their lives. Secondly, what we also observe is the collective punishment of relatives. And this is actually has been very well documented with the case of Hamza, but also Fatima, is that very much the relatives of the exiles have been actually using as a strategic tool, as a weapon of manipulation to coerce the exiles who are abroad. And the relative of these individuals who are left in Tajikistan, they face with difficulties such as access to education, for example, scrapping of their professions, not allowing medical care, and also they've been very much also harassed psychologically, but women, for example, have been very much also harassed sexually. And this is considered a very strong tool for the government to manipulate actually and play with the relatives. In stage 2, now I'm going to move towards arrests and detention. So Tajikistan has been one of the most countries of Central Asia who've been using and abusing internet diffusion and red notices. So for example, in 2017, it has issued red notices for 1,873 individuals, given the fact that Tajikistan has a population of 9 million people, it can make Tajikistan as the world's largest per capita emitter of red notices. Secondly, it's been also been more ingenious by using new tools, and this calls cataloging people or using listing of designating people as terrorists or putting them on the list of terrorist financing through the National Bank, for example. And finally, in second stage, what we can also see is detentions of relatives. So this is through psychological and physical harassment. So what happens is that very often the Tajik government invites the relative for friendly conversation, but it turns to be actually not friendly at all. And finally, stage 3 in Tajikistan, what we observe is that increasingly extradition has been facilitated through diplomatic ties and through international cooperation such as Shanghai Cooperation Agreements or Minsk agreements, who actually make it very easy for the autocrats to extradite wanted individuals. Secondly, we also observe abduction and illegal return of Tajik citizens from neighboring countries. This has been particularly well documented with the case of Maksud Ibragimov in 2015, who's been kidnapped in the streets of Russia and then returned back to Tajikistan. And finally, what we also observed is that when they're being extradited back to Tajikistan, they extremely face torture and ill treatment to obtain confession. This is a tool that has been widely used and that has also been lately noticed by the UN Special Rapporteur to Tajikistan. So these are the numbers that shows actually the flow of Central Asian exiles in 2017 who applied for asylum in Europe. And as you can see, among the 5 countries of Central Asia, Tajikistan has the highest amount of applicants. So what we can do, so what we have noticed that while we have a high amount of Tajikistan fleeing the country towards the European Union, some European countries, such as Poland, have actually been very reticent of giving asylum or proceeding the asylum applications for the people who are really much in need of it. But we also need to remember that Poland is actually signatory of 1951 UN Convention, and therefore it has its obligation actually to give rights of asylum to these people. Secondly, when it comes to Interpol red notices, I think Interpol needs to very much distinguish between what is a criminal case and what is a political motivated case, because Tajikistan, for the moment, what is using is abusing the label of terrorism to persecute the opposition or civil society or journalists. And finally, I think there is also responsibility for the European Union to bring Tajikistan and to make Tajikistan more accountable, because European Union is one of the main trading partners and one of the more strategic partners in Tajikistan for the moment, is the 5th largest trading partners in the country. It has signed bilateral agreements, bilateral cooperation agreement with Tajikistan, but also it's going to sign very soon the European Central Asia Strategy for 2019. And in all of these agreements, human rights and democratic norms are supposed to be the basis of the cooperation. But what we can see is actually the European Union is very good in applying this in practice on paper, but not actually in actions. And this has been very much documented with the case of Kayilo Mirsaidov, because it was only at the last moment that a European diplomat woke up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Safira, for describing tools used by the Tajik government and other Central Asian countries. And now will be Bruno Mi. Bruno represents Fair Trials International. He's a senior policy advisor. He leads on various aspects of Fair Trials legal and policy work, including on cross-border justice and the reform of the Interpol system. And Bruno, because we are short of time, if we want to have also a fruitful discussion, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to be extremely brief because I know that we don't have any time. My name is Bruno, as you just heard. I work for Fair Trials. We call ourselves the Global Criminal Watchdog. What that essentially means is we're a non-governmental organisation that works to improve the right to a fair trial. And we have been working extensively on the issue of Interpol red notices and diffusions. There are lots of discussions about red notices and diffusions, increasingly, I think, particularly in the OSCE region, and there's growing understanding of what they are, but I think there is still quite a lot of bad information out there about what Interpol is and what red notices are. So I just wanted to give some background as to what it is that we're dealing with. So Interpol is the world's largest policing organization. Its main role is to bring together police forces of around 190 countries. Its main role is the exchange of information, and one of the ways in which this information is exchanged is through red notices. Red notices, often described as international arrest warrants, they are not international arrest warrants. They are more comparable to electronic wanted posters. It's a way of sharing information about wanted persons. But the problem is that these red notices are treated by many countries as arrest warrants, and they do result quite often in the triggering of arrests and extradition proceedings with some devastating consequences. So we heard from discussions today so far that Tajikistan and other countries in the Central Asia region tend to be often misuse red notices and target political dissidents through the red notice system. So the question might be then, well, why does this happen? Does Interpol allow this to happen? The short answer to that question is that Interpol doesn't want this kind of stuff to happen. There are rules within Interpol's constitution that says that Interpol's work should respect human rights and that its systems shouldn't be used for political or religious purposes. The main problem, though, is how these rules are being implemented, and there are three challenges to that. One is that we have very little idea about how these rules are interpreted in the first place. What do they mean by human rights? The second problem is how effectively they're able to stop red notices, abusive red notices from being disseminated in the first place. And the third problem is the redress mechanism offered by Interpol. So what happens if you do find yourself subject to an abusive red notice? And we found that there were issues with all three aspects. Muhyiddin Kabiri, who spoke just a while ago, has been quite gracious in the sense that he didn't really bring so much attention to his own case, but his case is actually quite a good example of the faults in the Interpol system of checking red notices. Muhyiddin ended up with a red notice despite the fact that actually he was fairly well known. So if Interpol had an effective system of reviewing its red notices, all they needed to do really was just to Google his name, and it would have been quite clear to them that he was a political activist. Alarm bells should have gone off, and they should have thought twice about issuing a red notice against him. So what that case illustrates is that there have been reforms, there have been changes. The Interpol have been responsive to a certain degree to human rights criticisms, but clearly there's some work to be done still in terms of improving those systems and making sure that its mechanisms are effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. And our last speaker is Steve. Steve Swerdlow represents Human Rights Watch. He's a Central Asia researcher in the Europe and Central Asia division of Human Rights Watch. He's an attorney with over 15 years of human rights experience on Russia, Ukraine, the Caucasus, and of course on Central Asia. And also Steve leads human rights work specifically in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and he was one of the first human rights workers to conduct extensive field work in Uzbekistan since the government's decision to allow human rights organization back into the country. Steve, please.
Thank you, Tomasz, and Exeter also for the support for this event. Прошу прощения, что перевода нет. I'd like to also recognize at the outset that members of the Tajik government delegation are joining us today, and I just want to also recognize that and acknowledge that, and I think that is a good sign. Спасибо, что из госделегации Таджикистана тоже пришли. This is a difficult discussion. I was going to speak about harassment of dissidents abroad, harassment of dissidents in the country, but I don't need to do that. I think we have a little time. We know that this is an emergency in Tajikistan, and I honestly just have to glance around the room for a moment, and here's what I see. I see Mirza Rahim Kuzov, who was detained on a red notice in Greece for 40 days on a politically motivated extradition request, and with the help of some colleagues at this table, at Fair Trials and other organizations, was able to be freed. I see Jamshed Yorov, a lawyer who was detained in 2016. We know the case of his brother, who was at Mir Yorov, but he was also detained and was luckily able to escape. I see Shukrat Rahmatullah over here, a journalist now in Europe, whose father received a life sentence in June 2016 as a member of the IRPT after a trial which was closed to international scrutiny and to domestic civil society organizations, a life sentence among 13 other individuals. I see Ilham Yakubov, or I saw him earlier, who experienced torture in Tajikistan earlier when the party began to be purged. So this is a crisis that is so real, it's so fast-moving, and in somewhat in a different circumstance than some of the other crises in the region. We actually have the first-hand witnesses, eyewitnesses of this crisis with us today, and to some degree that gives us the opportunity to verify things in more detail in this crisis and bring it to international attention more quickly. And I wanted to say very quickly that I think, August 2018, just directly before we all got here to Warsaw, taught me some lessons about Tajikistan, gave me some hope. That's already been alluded to a little bit by Muhyiddin in his comments about what the international community can do and what social media can do. We have here the question, can social media help deliver justice in Tajikistan? Of course, it's not the only thing that can make a difference. But we've seen that Tajikistan is responding in some ways to this, in some ways very modest social media campaigning to free Khairullah, to free Hamza, to free Fatima. Those were really remarkable developments. And I think, the most notable lesson for me came when the British ambassador to Tajikistan, Hugh Philpott, adopted the Free Khairullah hashtag, I think in July. And it made a huge difference. We also saw Harlem Desir put out a very strong statement. And on July 12th, we saw a chorus of states condemn the 12-year sentence that was handed down to Khairullah Mirsayev simply for exposing corruption. In fact, his statement was very strong. He said that Tajikistan was essentially aiming to target corruption itself. Not target corruption, but target reporting about corruption itself. August also brought out some of the darker aspects of the context in Tajikistan and why the fight for human rights is so important right now. We had the first ISIS attack in Central Asia that we know of. We had 4 cyclists, foreign cyclists, lose their lives to Americans, a French citizen, a Dutch citizen. It was an incredibly tragic wake-up call to all of us that terrorism is a real concern. But the repression in Tajikistan, I think, can only harm efforts to try to combat those phenomena. It can only make it more confusing, less transparent, harder to unravel. So I think it's very unfortunate that, in a way, we can see the pressure on the IRPT reached its peak after those events of the terrorist attack on July 29th. We saw the government, in a very knee-jerk reaction, blame the IRPT for this event without any credible evidence at all. And so I think what it shows us, August really just shows the worst and the best. It shows us that there's this propensity within the government at the moment to respond in a knee-jerk reaction. But I think that may be the more superficial response. I think, and maybe on a deeper level, we've seen some human rights successes. We've seen some concessions. And now there's been some talk in the past few weeks that there could be an amnesty of prisoners, and that amnesty could possibly include such prisoners as Buzurgmir Yorov, Zaid Saidov, Mahmoud Ali Khaid, and we very much call on the government to uphold its international human rights commitments and to release those individuals unconditionally and immediately. And I just call on everyone here, including the diplomatic community, to keep up the pressure, to keep tweeting, to keep raising awareness, to use social media, use all the tools we have, and hopefully the Tajik government will also be part of this discussion. So thank you very much to everyone for supporting this.
Thank you very much, Steve. And as Steve mentioned that we, of course, welcome the presence of the Tajik delegation. And so far, our discussion was quite constructive and all the presentations were to the point. So before I allow someone to ask the first question and give our speakers a chance to answer it, I would ask to follow the steps and to have as constructive discussion as possible. So who would like to ask the first question? Okay, there is one, please.
So, first of all, I would like to apologize for some noise from our side, but I wish we were provided by translation, so I was really, I haven't got any chance. And secondly, I really extremely sorry and apologize for my terrible English. So, thank you for inviting. And here, I want to have some remarks for all speakers. First of all, the first lady speaker, I'm sorry I misheard your name. please, I would like to advise you to follow academic, really, ethics when you are presenting some data. Why? You inform us that we do have just 4 official TV channels, but it is not true, and it is very, very ancient information. And officially nowadays, we do have 32 TV channels, 10 is official channels, and other are private. So, and other, just a minute. And about 600 lawyers. Just go to their website and check your data. Is your data correct or not? So, and Mr. Kabiri, first of all, really, I was very insulted and sorry for what is happening. Just a minute. With your grandson, and actually you can maybe even just go to my Facebook, and I also shared the hashtag. So I said it from the bottom of my heart, really. And also you can see that I like and shared the hashtag about high law, because I'm not official, I'm just academic and researcher, so that's why I can't allow myself to say something maybe others are not allowed. So, Mr. Kabiri, I would like to ask you a question. Yes, I'm not the representative of our legislative power, but as a researcher in the field of religious studies, I just can ask, make some remarks about why do government, or I don't know, why do, for example, myself and other researchers can consider Islamic Renaissance Party as an extremistic or etc. First of all, can you just, short question, do you feel the responsibility or accept the responsibility for the materials published by your party in your newspaper and or some books published and have official logo in of Islamic Renaissance Party? Just yes or no, and I will move on. So, do you feel a responsibility for everything you published officially via Najot and via other your books? Just yes or no?
Maybe before I...
Yes and no.
Yes and no. So, okay, let's go. Yes. So, why do Islamic? Why the Islamic Renaissance Party is being recognized as extremist or radical? In your official materials, there are a lot of samples. I will quote after that. Samples of hate speech, religious intolerance, and even, not even thousands and not hundreds, but thousands examples of anti-Semitism and Judophobia. Really, I will quote after that. So, how can you, that's why, if you are, now we are standing in Warsaw and near what? Near Warsaw Ghetto. So this is really specific place, very symbolic.
I'm sorry, can I ask you to sum up a bit?
So, yes, I will just want to present 2 or 3 quotes, examples from what was that you and your colleagues and members of your party, different authors, publishing, and you just, for others, just to know. Just example. Here is a book by the spiritual leader and founder of your party, Mr. Said Abloy-Nouri, called Daron Siyosat, which means beyond their policy, where there are a lot of examples of hate speech, religious intolerance, and even so. Just
okay, thank you.
Can you just help me to?
I think we get your point.
No. I want. Please let me. You gave me a floor, so listen to me. So, Mr. Said Abloy-Nouri, here's a book. Just as I will read it in Tajik. So just help me to translate, in order to be. So when Mr. Said Abloy-Nouri, in his book, named our country as a Darul Kufr, so it is the terminology used by ISIL. So his book, Daron Siyosat, I have even copy
I'm sorry,
It's
we have
published.
5 minutes left. Maybe we
Okay,
ask you
okay.
to
The
please
copy of this book,
ask-
and we have even hard copy if you need. So when he said, just okay, let me explain, please.
So would you be responsible for all speech of Mr. President Rahman? He recently called the girls with the hijab not Tajik, and also he called the Shi'i, the minority.
Okay, I will reply you. I will reply you after. I will reply you.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. And I'm sorry, John,
So-
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
So
I'm asking
what is the
people-
relation? What is the relation of the speech of Mr. Rahman and the Judophobic and anti-Semitic content
I'm
published by
sorry,
you?
I'm
What is the
sorry.
relation?
We asked for a constructive discussion
So,
and
let-
questions. Let others ask also questions.
Okay,
Thank
so-
you very much. That's all. Thank you very much.
So okay,
Now here's the second question.
just one
I'm sorry, sir.
just
Sir,
one
you
sentence.
have- you have a chance.
I want to thank you. So
Thank
I
you
want to
very much.
thank you for your attention, and I will say that all examples will be delivered for specific organizations who are combating
Thank
all
you.
of this.
Mr.
Thank
Kabiri
you.
will be here after the conference. You can continue with him the discussion. And here's the second question, but before you ask, please introduce yourself. I think, can you hear?
We can't hear you.
Can you try the other mic?
Okay, sorry. So my name is Umar Bakhtir, I'm a journalist from Tajikistan. I have a question for speakers, but I think maybe Freedom now can answer to it. The next step of your work, here we have heard too many good points and good reports about Tajikistan, which touched me personally. Thanks a lot. So I just want to know what will be your next step, and will you continue to work, especially in Central Asia, and especially for Tajikistan and political needs? Thanks.
Thank you for that, and we will continue to work on Tajikistan. It is one of our priority countries. We're working on a number of cases right now that are expected to be submitted to the UN Human Rights Committee as well as the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. And as it stands, we will continue to work on these cases. We will continue to defend political prisoners and file their cases at the UN to secure judgments and opinions that we hope the government of Tajikistan will honor. And I think I forgot to mention when I spoke about Mr. Saidov's case, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention in fact ruled on his case and found his detention arbitrary. So I would ask the government of Tajikistan to comply with that decision and release him.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We have still 4 minutes, so please hear the third question.
Hello, my name is Julia Solbach. I'm from my blog humanrightsquestion.wordpress.com, and I want to ask the Tajik delegation on what happened yesterday in front of the Sofitel Hotel, because there were quarrels with 3 Tajik activists, and one was beaten in the face, one was kicked on his leg, and the other one was driven with a car. And I'm not sure if it's a one-sided view from my side, because I heard there was also something going on with the car. But so this is why I want to ask for a statement.
Okay, thank you. Before maybe I give the floor to the Tajik delegation, maybe I will collect 2 more questions, okay? If there are some?
I have one more.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I have one more. I just forgot to ask, is it any possibility, could you say any possibility that international community, especially a European country and European organization, will enjoy you and help you to continue your work? Thanks.
And this is the question to whom?
Two speakers, maybe to Freedom Now or Steve, I don't know, anyone who can
Who would like
answer.
to?
Well, I can answer the
Yeah.
question if that's okay. I know that we are academics at the university, but we're trying to do is actually also work very closely with civil society organizations. So the database on Central Asia political exile is actually also being used as an analytical tool for civil society to conduct campaigns, but also extremely now by the lawyers to defend cases of persecution and to show to countries where the individuals are persecuted that they are aware of actually what's happening, particularly in Tajikistan. So we are therefore collaborating both with civil society and with lawyers, and this database is actually an open source, so it's open, and we, therefore the academics here are stepping up.
And justice movement proves. So this question can be replied anybody who feels that an appropriate a new generation in Tajik society right now who has no place in the political arena or social arena to speak up, to bring a different voice, to bring an opposing voice in the country. And those are the people who could teach them such initiatives, especially in human activism and human lobbying for public interest, are living in exile. So from now on, should we accept such changes from outside the Tajikistan, or we still need to have some hope from a movement coming from the inside the Tajikistan, because the diaspora is living outside the Tajikistan, so there are not many opportunities for the people. We are solely focusing on the people who is living outside the Tajikistan, but what will be the future of the generations who are now operating in the Tajikistan, the young people, the new generation, the people who are not having the chance to escape or leave the country? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, I don't understand what is the link or connection between anti-Semitism and the questions we are discussing now, because I don't think that my deputies, 2 deputies now in the jail for life for anti-Semitism. And also hundreds of the people now in prisons. There are not any case in Tajikistan about anti-Semitism, even in our party. By the way, now we are receiving a lot of letters from Israel about the situation, especially about the 100 case. I can send you, Mr. Azizi, if I'm right, Mr. Azizi. Yes. I can send you one link for some Israeli newspapers. They are writing about our party. They are writing about our positions, how one Islamic party could be moderate and find coexisting between different groups of society. And they are bringing this example. They want to bring this example for Arab neighbors. So now we are talking about the anti-Semitism in our party. Maybe there are some specific case. For example, we are supporting Palestinians. We are supporting a lot of things is not right in Israel and anywhere, but it has not any connection, any links with anti-Semitism. And second question is that about you mentioned about Mr. Nouri's books. Okay, Mr. Nouri was in life in our society. Nobody that time, you and government said him that in your book we found out something wrong. But now we are talking about post-peace agreement situation, not about books, not about newspapers was published during civil war. You can find, also we can find a lot of things during civil war. There was a lot of cases. Let us think about current situation, not about civil war and what we was done that time. Thank you very much.
Yes, right.
Thank you. As we can see,
1 minute for remarks.
Yes, please. I will give you the floor. As we can see, 1 hour and a half is not enough to discuss all of the topics you raised today. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there will be a statement submitted to the ODIHR and documents system where we will try to, let's say, sum up the whole discussion. And as promised, there is 1 minute, but only 1 minute because we need to leave the floor for the next plenary session for the Tajik delegation, please.
Mr. President, maybe I was misunderstood. I said about the religious intolerance in general and anti-Semitism as example. And the book I mentioned was published twice in 1995, in 1997, and third time it was published in 2007 after the agreement, etc. So I will issue you. I will give you just half copy of the book if you need. So. Okay, it was during the war, but you can say that yes, we are extremely sorry that it happened. So we condemn these opinions, etc. So I haven't heard about it. So And why nobody asked? Because that time maybe the academicians and other responsible people were busy with other things. And now we will really collect everything and as an initiative, civil initiative, we'll just want to show, and if you don't want to explain me, but there are some institutions who will make you to explain. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for attending our site event. As I mentioned, it's not enough time to discuss everything. If you want to continue some one-to-one or private talks, please do it outside this room. On behalf of all of the organizers, I thank you once again. Thank you.
Спасибо большое представителю правительства за то, что он поднял этот вопрос. И после этого заседания я представлю всем желающим